Thank you for joining us for another episode of Attribution Nation. In our new series, we're stepping into the C-suite to hear directly from CMOs navigating today's most complex marketing challenges. From AI disruption to the age-old alignment battles with sales, we're going to unpack the real reporting and data problems that marketing leaders are trying to solve. And the ones that still keep them up at night, quite frankly. So join us for candid conversations that go beyond metrics into the strategies, experiments, and lessons that are shaping the future of marketing leadership. Today, I'm joined by Jayashree Rajan, CMO at Nexla, an enterprise data integration platform. And in this interview, we're going to talk about how she's building marketing attribution from the ground up, aligning with sales on pipeline goals, and navigating the complexity of today's B2B buyer journey. So welcome to the show, and thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, Drew, thank you for having me. It's exciting to be here. And like you said, attribution, pipeline, revenue, all of these are things that, keep up any marketer, especially nowadays when things change so constantly. And AI is also in the mix. So I think this is going to be a good conversation. So thank you for having me.
Yeah, no, thank you for joining. I agree. This is going to be a great conversation. So let's just start really easy here. Tell us a little bit about how you first got into marketing and a little bit about your career path.
That's a good question. So I didn't follow the traditional marketing path, if you will. My background is in engineering. I started, which probably is critical to how I found marketing, but I started as an engineer, an electrical engineer. From there, I went on to actually build websites for customers, B2C customers first, and then B2B customers, physicians, portal, and so on. During the course, when I was an engineer, I kind of realized that I didn't enjoy the building aspect. I enjoyed more what I'm trying to solve. Why am I building something? What are some of the things that people were not happy about? The bugs that they were getting, the issues they were facing. So I was almost more intrigued by the why and how rather than the actual building aspect. And that led to my transition into product management, because that's naturally, hey, you start defining, right, the requirements, you start understanding your customer asks and bugs and all of that. So from product management, that was the early part of my career. From engineering, I started building and working on enterprise B2B software. And at that point, from product management, probably one of the leaders that I worked with, they said, hey, go figure out how to drive more people to the software. Hey, it's B2B. Go figure out not just the product, also how do you get visibility? How do you drive more people to log in and then use the product? So it was almost an accidental path, if you will, from being hey, why am I building certain things to how do I now get eyeballs? How do I get people's focus and attention and the retention aspect? So it morphed into me accidentally discovering those aspects of marketing at that point in time. And being data-driven, being an engineer, that aspect was also tapping a lot into my data-driven background, if you will. And from there on, I just learned more and more about marketing. I got to do a lot of different things and a lot of different companies, different scales, different sizes. And the more I learned, I was intrigued. I fell in love and I just couldn't stop. And, here I am just solving, again, marketing problems, different space, different audience. The challenges still remain, but marketing evolves constantly, right? And that's what is exciting and interesting for me and keeps me going even now.
That's very interesting. I think it's, you find so many people that got into marketing through different avenues, and some folks like yourself that come from engineering backgrounds, and then other folks that come from like English literature backgrounds and find their way into marketing.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy how people have these different paths. Although I think that engineering, when we think about marketing, old school marketing and having the 4 Ps, product is one of those Ps under marketing. I think there used to be a little bit more of an engineering to marketing pipeline than there is now that marketing, particularly in B2B, doesn't own product at all. I think it's a little unique in B2B and modern day marketing, but I think you probably had a little bit more similar career path to some older school marketers, I think.
Yes.
Do you find that that engineering background helps you have a different understanding of how to market a product than somebody that maybe doesn't have an engineering background?
I know there are different areas, different, like you said, rightfully, right? There are folks who are really strong with branding, who are strong with, content and messaging and wordplay. But underlying, I think the key for any marketer, right? It doesn't matter if you're a brand marketer, it doesn't matter if you're good at content, product marketing. You need to really understand the numbers, right? You need to say, hey, if I do this, how is this resonating, right? Whether it is driving awareness, whether it is driving, the middle of the funnel, right? They're getting more consideration and they are leaning towards your product, or whether it is, hey, I'm convinced this is the right product for me. Whatever tactics you do, whatever your strengths might be, underlying nowadays, right? I think it is key for every marketer to be data driven. So for me, I feel like given the background that I have, it does give me, that natural slant. I do think about data a lot when there are ideas, when there are experiments, A/B tests that we want to do. I do want to look at the data, right? Hey, is this resonating? All I did is, a couple weeks ago, we changed the call to action on the website. And I do want to know, hey, is this resonating with folks who are coming to our website? And sure enough, there is data to show, right? The call to action actually is driving more people and getting them to the destination that you want. So I do feel that, hey, I have that engineering background that helps me think through this. But I also feel a lot of marketers now are in a position where they have to constantly keep thinking about data, about attribution. It's not just, hey, I'm going to do something and just wait and see if that's going to help or not after 6 months, right? You don't have the luxury anymore.
Yeah, you definitely don't have the luxury of waiting 6 months to see if something's working or not. That's you're gonna get some nasty grams from a CEO or a CFO if you wait
You're
that long.
bored.
Yeah, where you're bored, somewhere you're gonna get a nasty gram from somewhere for sure. So now in your current role, you made a little bit of a transition because you've worked at a lot of large enterprises and now you've made the transition over to a startup. What really kind of fueled your decision to make that transition?
So, like I said, I think over the last several years, being in several large organizations actually helped me, with the depth and the breadth, right? But then over the years, I felt, hey, I've things like attribution, things like, lead routing, things like, your talking points that you provide to your SDRs or sales teams or enablement decks. I felt that I had done that multiple times, that I did want to go, and it was a deliberate intention, right? I did want to go in a smaller startup kind of an environment where I could help build the infrastructure, the framework, bring all of those years of experience, learning, and then AI changing the game, right? You have now things that you have to think about as a marketer, which previously I didn't have when I was working in the larger companies. So being in a smaller organization, in a startup, helped me with being able to move faster, experiment faster, being able to set things up from ground up, bring all those learnings and failures and everything, right, that I had from many years ago. And really just see how it's working. So being able to see the results of it faster too, right? You're able to do all of that in a startup much faster. You're able to pivot much faster than you would in a larger organization. So it was a deliberate attempt. I have been over the last several years going to smaller and smaller revenue size companies so that I could prepare myself, right, for being in a startup where it's, all hands on deck, move fast, do everything, quickly, learn quickly, pivot quickly. So, kind of it's an interesting experience, I would say.
I love that. I love that. I think it's interesting that you mentioned, building kind of the marketing infrastructure from the ground up. There's so many organizations that we see that particularly early on in their life cycle as an organization, they don't really care about marketing infrastructure. They kind of figure like, we'll worry about it when it's time to worry about it. And then by the time they start worrying about it, they actually waited a year too long or 2 years too long. And now they have a bigger mess to clean up as opposed to, starting out the right way and caring about that from the beginning when it's easy. Because it's easy at startup scale to build that infrastructure and then evolve it over time versus having to, wrangle this massive tangle of go to market and then build infrastructure around it. So I think it's a really interesting concept of just kind of like building that infrastructure from the ground up early on in the life cycle of an organization.
Exactly. You need to know what's working, what's not working, right? Otherwise, you might just be doing things and you might not see the results. So, for me, that's why attribution is a key aspect and trying to lay that groundwork earlier on. It's not about who, it's not about marketing versus sales versus channel, right? It is about, hey, where are we getting results? How do we amplify that? And for that, you need to have the right infrastructure, if you will. It doesn't have to be super complex, but you need to know at least what you're looking for and how do you figure out what's working.
Yeah, thank you for saying it's not marketing versus sales. I applaud that. Thank you very much. We love that. So moving from, a large organization to a startup, how has your approach to marketing measurement and attribution evolved as you've made that kind of change in your career, going from the large organizations to the smaller organizations?
Right. I would say, again, being in different organization sizes, different levels of maturity of the organization, and then the different types of the teams, right? Your org structure, your overlays. Different companies, like larger companies, it does go into who is the first touch, who is the last touch, and trying to always wrangle for every dollar. Hey, did I get now for a paid dollar? Did I get a return on investment? The user journey is not linear. A buyer journey is never linear. It's not about the fact that they saw a paid ad and then they went and immediately filled out a form and whoop, we have a winner, right? It never works. I wish it would work like that, but it's never that simple. They might then go, look at your website. They might then go talk to a partner and say, hey, I learned about this. I heard about this, but I think I want to work with you and make this, solution work for me. So the buyer journey is never linear, becomes more complex. The number of touches for a large enterprise deal also now increases, right? The last time I did this kind of analysis, we needed at least 8 to 12 touches the course of an enterprise deal to make sure that the prospect and the buying team has that information, that they are constantly learning and they are getting convinced before they make that buying decision. And in different channels, right? It's different formats of information as well to make those available for the buying groups or the buyers, if you will. So I would say it used to be who won this attribution game, which dollar actually helped you with that last touch of someone becoming an opportunity. Whereas in a smaller startup, it is not about who or which dollar. It is about that buyer journey. It is about, hey, we got this person, they entered the pipeline. What are all the things that we can do? How do we continue engaging, nurturing, touching them, providing them value so that they can be convinced? So for me, that's a big difference, right? In a startup versus a large organization. It's not about siloing the dollar spend and trying to prove your return on investment, trying to prove the value of that tactic that you're doing, where we know everything needs to work together. So I would say that's one big thing. The second big thing is, how do we actually become more efficient, right? In a startup world, we have to be fast. We have to be more efficient. We have to constantly look at how do we do 3, 4 things, like 4 different experiments at the same time. It's not just waiting for inbound alone. Whereas in a larger organization, you might actually have the luxury of having a lot of dollars, spend a lot of money, and just those inbound leads will keep your sales teams, your SDR teams occupied. Here, in addition to that, we have to figure out what are the other things we can do. We have to test messaging. We have to do other experiments. And then the one thing that I feel that's underlying that I don't think changes whether you're a large organization or a startup or a small organization, you still need to know what is helping. You still need to know, hey, if I am putting money in a paid channel, it doesn't mean that that form fill needs to come from there. Is it still helping buyers learn about the company? And they are still coming through other channels, right? You have other ways. You have ways of looking at your attribution. So that doesn't change. Knowing where you find success, knowing how to find that repeated success, how to amplify, I would say that doesn't change. But in a startup, it becomes, given your budget, given how you have to be laser focused, that becomes really more critical, I would say, than a large enterprise. You have to be really laser focused. So I would say it's the similar paradigm, but the laser focus becomes the differentiation in a startup world. But other than, those, I think some of the learning, some of my, hey, lead routing, how do you score? How do you prioritize? Because, people cannot go after every lead, same priority. So all of those learnings, all of those fundamentals, I think, are still important for a startup just as much as a larger organization.
Yeah, so I think if I had to kind of like recap what you said, it sounds like what you found is that there's some foundational elements that are not different at all. Like it's in some ways you're doing a lot of the same things at the foundational level, but there's some major differences in kind of the velocity of what you have to track in enterprise versus startup. Enterprise, you have more time, you have more resources to let things kind of bake, whereas in a startup world, you need to be a little bit more rapid in your approach and your assessment.
Yeah.
And then in addition to that, I think another thing that you were saying is that, with the startup world, you have to do more testing, you have to do more experimentation so that you can iterate more rapidly, again getting into that velocity thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you summed it up well. But again, being data driven, some of those foundational elements, looking at attribution, but for a different viewpoint, different lens, not fighting for attribution, but looking to see how you can amplify what's working. I think those things, are similar, just that, how you implement them or what you use them for is different, large enterprise versus startup.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I look for, because you mentioned laser focus when it comes to marketing measurement for startups. I think one of the most important things that particularly early stage companies can look for is not necessarily just what's working. What's working is great, but for early stage companies that really have to care a lot about budget and spend, it's almost more important to find what's not working so that you can, as soon as you realize it's not working, cut off that spend so you're no longer wasting money. That is one of the things that I think that I think organizations of all size tend to focus on what's working and not what's not working. But I think that's even more important for early stage companies because of that, lack of budget. Like we have to be more careful with every dollar we spend because there's always a cash flow issue with early stage companies.
I think you're absolutely right. The what is working, so you can, put your dollars and you can figure out where you can amplify things. But where are the dollars not working, especially when, you do have limited budget, that is implicitly, it is a given that you do need to have that as part of your marketing fundamentals. And I'll give you an example. We did run 2 or 3 C-level events last year, right? And again, on surface level, it sounds great, right? Hey, you're able to meet your C-level decision makers, your buyers. There were some good meetings, but when I actually looked at how those meetings translated to revenue, right? So yes, they got into pipeline, none of them moved forward. So then I started questioning, and I'm like, hey, I'm not going to make that kind of investment this year. I would rather use that, budget to do other things. Similar example, we started a Reddit campaign targeting our data audience a couple months ago. Now, being that, you have to be rapid, you have to be mindful of your budget, it was clear, right, that we were getting people to our website, but those people were not. We have tools and technologies now, right, that you can see people are coming, but it's not relevant. They are not doing any kind of relevant actions or learning more about your solution to even become future buyers. So again, it was a decision, right? Hey, do we want to spend right now dollars here, or do we want to actually double down where we know something is working, right? So it is, you know, really good, valid point. You have to be fast in making those decisions. You don't have the luxury of a lot of time to wait and, you know, let something happen, let magic happen. It's not going to happen.
Yeah, yeah. You're building out marketing infrastructure from scratch in your current role. And you and I talked a little bit about this in our prep call that you had to kind of like manually sort the data before you could start building your structured reporting. What did that kind of early stage teach you about what matters most in your marketing data and attribution?
When I came in here to my current company, Nexla, I did have to do a lot of manual Salesforce report, a lot of digging into opportunities, and from there, backtracking into contacts and leads. So I think some things that, where I felt were important, and this is something that you continue to, build. So like I said, where are you able to make the most connection with that right title, the right persona, right? What kind of persona, like what kind of vertical is resonating more? Hey, if I want to focus on finance versus healthcare versus, maybe like retail supply chain, I don't have the dollars again to focus and message to everybody, right? And we don't want to be everything to everybody. So looking at where are we getting repeated success? What use cases we're getting repeated success? And I had to look through all the opportunity data manually, the close won, the close lost, because I wanted to also understand why are we losing? If we lose deals, what is the reason? Is it that we didn't do a good enough job tying their pain points to our solution? Maybe we didn't do the right messaging. Maybe we didn't help connecting them. Maybe we didn't touch them appropriately, with a number of, different touches, being a webinar, maybe give them some assets, customer case studies. Maybe we didn't do enough of that. So for me, it's also about the close won and close lost, because that then helps you going back to your earlier comment, right? Yes, maybe marketing doesn't influence product like it used to be before, but some of this information can go back. Hey, we lost this because it was a competitive motion, and in the conversations we heard A, B, and C features, or A, B, and C connectors were missing or they were lacking. So getting those kind of, getting that information back from Salesforce is important, right, for you as a marketer. So I had to look through, manually build those reports. How many meetings are we getting? Because yeah, your leads could be great. You have a volume of leads, but maybe the quality is not so good. So I had to also go back and look at the quality, which dictates like how many meetings are you able to get out of those leads from the different sources. So now I have built reports into Salesforce for all of those. We have stages defined, but it has been a journey, right? And that's important. You need to know how many months or weeks does an opportunity stay in a certain stage. Is it getting touched enough? Are we doing the right, closure or right follow-ups with that prospect? Are we getting the right buying cycle, buying committee involved in those decisions? So I think we need to start looking at all of those. So, those are all things that manually I used to look at, but now we've been cleaning up Salesforce and we do have a better way of reporting. I have reports for meetings now. I have reports for pipeline generated. I have reports for pipeline movement, the last touch. When did we last touch a prospect after it got into the pipeline? So those are all some of the things that, I do look at every day when I wake up.
I think I love your comment about looking into loss reasons and doing loss analysis because you can find such rich data in the reason why we lose deals. And I think it's another underrepresented part of reporting and analysis, particularly in the marketing department. We typically let like sales handle the loss analysis when in reality, marketing could learn a lot from it as well. Just as an example, we're doing a go-to-market assessment right now for one of our clients, and we're doing loss analysis for them. And the three primary reasons why we lose deals, the first one's pricing. So, obviously that's something that we can approach. The next one is meeting cancellations and no-shows. Those are two vastly different problems to solve. One of them is very strategic in terms of pricing. The other one is a little bit more operational and tactical with meeting cancellations and no-shows, but we can totally action on those things. And if you don't do the loss analysis, you'll never know why you're losing these deals and what your opportunities are to make improvements
Yep.
throughout the entire go-to-market process. And while marketing may not be able to specifically influence pricing, because even though that's one of the 4 Ps, marketing usually doesn't do pricing in B2B world anymore, but we can still bring that analysis to the surface and help combat that. Because another aspect of like when we lose deal to pricing, it may not necessarily be that our pricing is wrong. It may be that we're not doing a good job up front from a marketing department explaining the true value of the platform or what we're selling.
Yep.
So that it takes pricing out of the equation, right? So marketing can still combat that without even actually like changing pricing at all. So there's just so much value in looking at why we lose. And I'm glad you mentioned that, because I think it's such an untapped gold mine for marketing organizations.
Exactly. And like you said, you will find these, polar opposite reasons, right? Like you said, I mean, those are some of the reasons that I found, but then they are solvable too, right? If there is a no-show, you know that you don't have enough of the buying committee, right? So you need to multi-thread, right? So you can, almost then figure out, hey, how do I go touch more people in an organization? How do I raise awareness? So it's important for marketing constantly to think about these aspects because, yeah, the what you said exactly, the pricing page we have on our website, I realize from a marketing perspective, we do need to have better information, right? It's a lot of information, and there is a way to simplify that information so someone can digest that much better in the decision making process.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now, I want to get a little bit tactical into attribution because this is Attribution Nation. So, as you have seen your career evolve and as you've seen marketing evolve, historically, first touch and last touch attribution have been, the two most common forms of attribution. How do you think about those two methodologies, and how do you see things changing now that buying journeys are getting more complex than ever?
Yeah. I mean, the first touch and the last touch are definitely important, right? Because the first touch is really the point that someone is getting introduced to your solution. It's again not about, hey, I'm fighting for that ROAS, right? I'm fighting for that $1 return on investment, but it is about how did someone like if Drew is a buyer, how do I get Drew to know about my solution? Because I want more of that to happen, right? So for me, the first touch part, let's assume it's a LinkedIn channel and that's where most of my buyers are. I want to make sure that I get more information constantly, regularly updated there, and I target the right set of folks there with my company's information. The last touch, I know it's actually an important aspect because it does tip someone over, but that the whole notion of that last touch is that they filled out a form, right? And it may not always be that they filled out a form. So for me, the first point of view, learning about our solution is important, but then after that, we have to do a bunch of different things, right? There is no substitute. There is no magical, hey, last thing that they can do all the time, to go and then immediately fill out a form. I don't think it's a consistent pattern, it's a consistent behavior, but you do know, hey, you can learn that you have to touch someone, like I mentioned earlier, 10 to 12 times or 10 to 15 times. You need about 7 buyers from the buying committee to be involved, in your touches. So those things you can actually learn in terms of attribution and say, yeah, I'm realizing that we need more people. It's not the single threaded conversation. It's not that one person making that decision. But the philosophy, long story short, I do like to see how many touches did it take for us to convert someone? Can we actually replicate, you know, the 10, if it is 10 touches, 12 touches? Can we ensure that we are doing that consistently? How many types of buyers, how many buyers do we need to be involved? At what stages? I would say those are all equal aspects of attribution, and not just the first and the last touch. But each touch is important. You have to keep touching a prospect, right? There is no substitute for that.
You mentioned this earlier, and I think I just want to call it out because you mentioned it again. So obviously, it's important is in understanding who all the buyers are in the organization. That seems to be a major challenge for organizations of all sizes. How are you solving that problem of building out a buying committee and making sure that we're multi-threading?
Yeah. And I would love to hear from others if there are better solutions as well. But, at the end of the day, you have to look, right? So I have to go and see, hey, Drew is working at X company, and there are other folks in the same company in that org chart. So there are lots of solutions for that, right? Where you can look at other folks, similar titles, similar org structure, connections that you might have in the organization. And you have to bring them all together, right? You have to put them in your sequences. You have to call those people. You have to make sure you invite them to your events. But you have to be cognizant, right? You don't want to say, hey, I'm calling, Joe from XYZ company. I'm also calling John from XYZ company. And I'm not making any association about the two folks, right? I'm just calling them this. We shouldn't do those things. Those I would say are the bigger gaps in process when you actually just cold outbound, but you just separate out, hey, John from Joe, even though they're in the same organization, you should have some conversations, right? And some of the best sellers, that's what they do. They're like, hey, I've been talking to John in your organization, and I realized that you might be working with John and both of you might be evaluating. Why don't we get on a call and I can catch you up? I can understand your requirements, right? So having that closed loop conversation, it builds a credibility, first of all, that hey, you're doing your research about that company. You do understand who are the decision makers in that organization. You're acknowledging that they have pain points, but you're bringing the whole thing together, and you're not sounding like, hey, I didn't do enough research. I'm just having conversations, and I do sound silly because I'm not making the connection. I'm talking to similar people in the same organization, and I'm not making that connection. So for me, I think that the buying committee, there are different sources, there are data providers, data aggregators that you can, try to look for titles. You can look at org charts. You can look at their LinkedIn profiles, but the conversations also matter, right? How you connect the conversations and how do you make sure that they know who you're talking to, I think is important as well.
I love that little nugget in there about the conversations because I think a lot of organizations just focus on getting people into a CRM and don't really focus on, hey, we need to have these conversations in a way that recognizes the fact that, using your example, Joe and John are connected and working together. It's almost like, we hear a lot of like random acts of marketing. That's almost like random acts of selling. It's like I'm calling Joe and I'm calling John, and we're having completely separate conversations and not linking them together in any way, shape, or form. I think that's a really interesting little nugget to take away from that. So I think, kind of going back to something we were talking about in our prep meeting was, we talked a little bit about aligning with sales on what pipeline impact really means, and how do you in making sure that marketing and sales are speaking kind of a similar language there. How do you maintain that alignment as tactics and programs and processes evolve?
Yeah. So I think the joint goals, right? I think that is an important aspect where we do say, hey, our company, we need to create Y dollars in revenue, and for that, we need X dollars in pipeline, right? And again, there are different philosophies, right? The 3X coverage, the 4X coverage, the no X coverage. There are lots of, every day I see different philosophies. But bottom line is you need to align on how many or what revenue you need, how much pipeline you need to generate, and then what is your conversion rate, right? Between pipeline and revenue. How are we able to move opportunities once they get into the pipeline and all the way to close one deal? But loosely speaking, though, I do take that alignment between sales and marketing, and then we convert that backwards to how many meetings do we need to generate that much pipeline, right? Because meetings are the precursor, that's the first qualification stage. And once you have that, then something can get into a pipeline for the, initial discovery call and then latter stages. So how do we get to that many meetings? And then for that, roughly how many MQLs do we need? But it's not a numbers game, right? It's not always about, hey, I need 1,000 MQLs to get to 30 meetings, right? It's the quality of MQLs, and it is constantly also looking at how can we optimize? Why should we, hey, I tried this, but why am I not getting the number of meetings that I thought I'm going to get? Or I'm going to try something else, and I can probably become more efficient with the meetings that we can get out of that particular tactic. So it is aligning with the net goal for the organization and then working backwards to what do we need to do to generate, the net new QLs, and then where should we be going to get that quality that you need. And then how do we keep getting better? How do we keep optimizing? Where is the friction? The pipeline leaks. I think those are all important aspects that we do align between marketing and sales. Hey, where do we have leaks? If this works, and if we are able to hit those numbers, are there leaks? Should we be looking at those, right? I think those are important conversations that you do need to have together, that we do have together. Every week we have pipeline review calls and we talk through every opportunity all the way from stage 0 to stage 7, which is close one.
So a lot of work with conversion rates and optimizing the funnel and making sure that we don't have any leaks. So what are you doing differently now that this is, you've identified that this is one of the ways that we stay aligned with the sales organization. What are you doing differently now to kind of like diagnose and fix leaks in our funnel or bottlenecks in our funnel? Because obviously, to your point, you can't fix these problems by just dumping more MQLs in. Because if you just dump more MQLs in, if they're crappy MQLs, it doesn't fix anything. It just provides work. Yeah. So how are you looking at diagnosing and fixing those types of leaks and bottlenecks in the funnel?
Yeah. So I think the first part was looking at our MQLs to meeting efficiency, right? And what might we be doing different? How can we have speed of response, right? If you have someone who comes to your website inbound and they say, hey, hand raiser, I want some, I want an answer. I'm looking for a solution. Or they went to our pricing page and said, I need to understand more. How do we make sure that we're actioning them quickly? We have made lots of changes there. How do we touch them? The content that or the email that we send them, and then how quickly can we call them and try to schedule that meeting? So those things we have tried to become more efficient because that was one point of leakage, if you will. So sure enough, you can see now the MQLs to meetings definitely are improving and they're increasing. But it's a constant journey, right? You don't say, hey, I'm done and it's over. We have to keep looking at how can we make that machine more efficient. Can we use scheduling? I introduced web chat, a bot to have conversations even during offline hours when we don't have agents live. So it is looking at how can you touch some of those aspects where you might be having leaks before. People might have just walked away, or people might have given up because they said, hey, I went here, no one reached out. So now we make sure that we follow up in real time and we're continuing that process. The other process would be when someone gets into that initial meeting, the qualification state, and so on, then what are we doing in terms of touching them? How are we actually doing follow-ups with them? What are we saying on calls with them, right? So I do look at the transcripts. We use Avoma for meeting recording. So I do look at transcripts, and that's where I like to understand what was the prospect asking for, and did we actually help with that enablement? Did we help with the one pager? Easy for me, right? The prospect said, call me back, but send me a one pager first. Easy to make sure that we are following up and closing loop with those kind of leakages, because that's easy, right? You don't want to say, oh, the prospect said, call me later. I'm not going to do anything. I'm going to wait. Instead, keep touching them, keep them warm, keep them interested. So those processes between, when an opportunity gets into the pipeline to when it progresses to the next stage, how much time are we taking and what are we doing to follow up and send and keep them informed, engaged? I think those were the other areas of that pipeline leak, if you will, that I've been looking into and trying to help optimize with, the marketing perspective, right? How can we get them enablement on the right topics? How can we give them 2 slides that they can use if the meeting goes a certain way? How can we give them 4 blogs that they can use? So it's almost like, using some of those progression states and the leaks that are happening or stalls that are happening, and what can we do to help plug those gaps. So I've been looking at that, and we have been making progress in terms of moving an opportunity all the way from once with us in the pipeline to when they can actually do a POC with us. At that point, they're pretty convinced that our solution is going to meet their needs. So making sure that we don't lose anything there.
Okay, I've got 2 things that I want to follow up on that
Sure.
with. First off, I think it's amazing that you are a CMO that actually reads sales transcripts. Like, that is really cool. I don't know many CMOs that do that. That is like a hidden gold mine because, to your point, like, you get to hear requests for specific pieces of content. You get to hear things like, hey, do you have a case study on this use case? Well, we don't. But now I know that we need to go create one because it's been asked for by multiple customers. That I think is huge. I love that you're listening to sales transcripts or reading sales transcripts. The other thing that I wanted to call out is the conversation you were having about optimizing conversion rates and how it's not something that you can just, set it and forget it. You have to continue to monitor. I think one of the things that is a mistake that most people make about conversion rates is that most people think that you just want to get every conversion rate to go up. And that's not necessarily the case. Sometimes you actually fix funnels by decreasing a conversion rate and finding an optimal balance through the funnel. And so I think that's an area where a lot of marketers maybe kind of like miss the purpose of conversion rate tracking and just think that, oh, let's get everything to as high a conversion rate as possible. No. You have to make sure that you've got the right balance, and that balance is constantly changing. It's never just the same. It's constantly going up and down. So you have to keep an eye on it regularly. I think at a minimum, you have to be reviewing that balance on a quarterly basis.
Exactly.
Because things can change market dynamics can change so much that you've got to have an eye on that on a quarterly basis at a minimum.
Yeah. No, I think absolutely. And, to your point, now technology is so evolved, right? And marketing before would have been more painful, but I can go to Orem, which the SDR team uses. They do calls. I have transcripts, so I can read transcripts and be like, hey, let's send this document. Or I can go look at the next call in Avoma with, the SDR, the sales, AE, and prospect. And I know what is it that they were looking for? What were the pain points? And did we have something that we could have provided sales or not? But those things are gold mines, right? Like I wouldn't trade those for anything because that's really what tells you what should we be doing from a marketing perspective? Where should we be focusing on? What is missing? What's the gap?
Yeah. I love that concept of a CMO reading sales call transcripts. I think that's brilliant personally. So what we usually like to do at the end of these interviews is I like to kind of go through and recap what I think the key takeaways were. So we'll do that now. I think one of the first key takeaways is, if at all possible, build out your marketing infrastructure the right way as early on as you possibly can. It's going to help you with just generally being better at marketing, but it's also going to help you make sure that you don't have a massive cleanup project down the road. So get it right from the start and then iterate as you go. Another one is that, no matter how big the organization is, there's one thing that just doesn't change. This is consistent across all organizations of any size, which is that you have to know what's working and what's not working. And now there's differences in the philosophy and the methodologies and the how do you get there based on size and scale of the organization. But ultimately, that is the fundamental thing that never changes. Multi-threading is a huge challenge for organizations, but it's so important to making sure that we don't have people leak out of the funnel, making sure that we are engaging with the right people. And then, but not only that, but also making sure that we are not just multi-threading for the sake of adding new names to the database, but we're actually connecting the dots in the conversations that we're having. That your call out of, having a conversation with Joe and saying, hey, I've been talking to John a lot. Maybe we should schedule a meeting and get you caught up on where we're at and see what your requirements are. That is so easy to do and so impactful because it just shows that you're paying attention to things. You're doing your research. And then the last one that I'll call out here is that things change so rapidly in our modern day world that, you can't just look at something once and then fix it and then assume it's in good shape forever. You do have to constantly review these things and monitor these things and check in on them to make sure that, market dynamics haven't changed that now mean that we need to reduce the volume of MQLs to increase the quality. So I think just that idea that you have to keep an eye on these things is really important.
Yeah, no, I think you got them all. The foundation for all of this is data, right? So I think, there is no substitute for being data driven. There is no substitute to, looking at how you spend your dollars, what is working, what's not working. So you have to continuously keep doing that. I know we didn't touch upon this, the course of this conversation, but marketing has changed so much. And, you have to be AI first, right? That is one fundamental philosophy that I keep talking about all the time. And I talk to the SDRs and I talk to my marketing team. Be AI first. There is, AI transcripts, right? For everything. Use AI solutions, right? To do the one pager when you know that there is a gap. So use it to figure out how to be faster, more nimble, more adaptive. So that's one additional thing that I would say, is another evolution.
It wouldn't be a podcast in 2025 if we didn't talk about AI in some way, shape, or form. So yeah, thank you for getting in that comment about AI so that we can make sure that, all the algorithms put us to the top because we talked about AI. But all joking aside, I totally agree about AI. I think that there's obviously a lot of benefits to it. I think there's a lot of hesitation in using it as well. And some of that hesitation is very valid. But I think that generally speaking, organizations have got to find a way to use AI to their benefit, because if you aren't, your competitors certainly are. So if you aren't, you're going to be at a competitive disadvantage.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining the podcast and taking the time to have such a thoughtful conversation with us. I think this has been a fantastic conversation. I've really enjoyed hearing from you and learning from your career journey and how you're approaching things from your unique perspective of coming from an engineering background. So thank you so much for joining. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. This was a blast, and you had some really good viewpoints, good, discussion topics. So I think this was a complete blast. Thank you.